Welcome to Season 2 of Feeding Families on the Eco-Parent Podcast Network. And don't forget to check out the new season of our other top podcast, Raising Kids Naturally. But before diving into this episode, a little shameless self-promotion from my son.
My dad started Eco-Parent when I was in the womb. Now it's pretty much the only parenting magazine still in print. If you like the podcast, you'll probably like the magazine too. You can subscribe online. You might also be interested in Eco-Parent's online courses, especially the kids nutrition and kids wellness courses. Stick around until the end of the episode and my dad will give you a discount code. Enjoy the show.
The Feeding Families podcast is all about food and nutrition for kids. We bring you new ideas and inspiration for your kitchen and answers to your food questions to help you overcome the very real, very frustrating food-related challenges so many parents are trying to figure out. I'm your host, Jess Sherman, family wellness educator, author, practitioner of functional and holistic nutrition, and mother. I want you to develop unwavering confidence in the choices you make every day. So let's get into Feeding Families. Hello, families, and welcome back to the Feeding Families podcast. I have a guest with us today because I wanted to talk about food and food additives and what's in our food and how to make decisions in the grocery store that are practical, that don't take forever, and just to kind of narrow that down. So, as you know, our whole season 2 is about nourishing our kids. I mean, that's what we talk about here. We talk about food, but we also talk about other aspects of nourishing our kids. Food is a really important aspect of how we nourish our kids. It's not the only aspect. And if you want a refresher on that, just go back to episode 1 of season 2. And we talked about all the different ways that we nourish our kids. But food is a big one. And I know you're here because you're all feeding a family. So I asked Mira Dessy to come and talk about what's in our food. And I did this with a little bit of trepidation. I was a little bit nervous about this topic because I don't want people to throw up their hands and say, "Oh my gosh, everything is poison. How do I feed my kids?" And Mira is known as the ingredient guru. And she has become a real expert in deciphering what's in our food, what matters, what doesn't. You know, we all have packaged foods, I'm sure, in our pantries because life is life and we are all busy. So thank you for coming, Mira, first of all, because you're going to help us decipher what matters and what doesn't when it comes to food and food labels. So welcome.
Thank you. And I'm so glad to be here. I always love talking with you. And now I get to help you support your community, which is just wonderful.
Yeah, we always have really good conversations, you and I. And I asked you here because I was so nervous about it, and because I feel like not nervous about it, but I don't want people leaving without hope. I don't want people leaving scared. And you have such a proactive or a positive way of just really practical ways of thinking about this. So let's dive into that. Okay.
That sounds great.
So there is a lot of junk that has crept into our food. Well, first of all, let's back up a second. Why do you do this work? Like, what brought you here, and what got you so interested in helping people understand what was in their food?
And that is such a great place to start because I actually wasn't always the ingredient guru. I wasn't even always a holistic nutrition educator. Many years ago, I was a database administrator for an international research firm. And I liked my job and I was good at it. And it was very interesting and rewarding work. The change for me came about when, over a period of time, I got sicker and sicker until I got to the point where I was literally living my life on the sofa. I had an immune system collapse. If I wanted to walk upstairs, I had to lie down on the top landing to rest before I could go to bed. I was not able to take care of my 3 children very well. I really struggled with daily responsibilities, and it was really challenging. Now, over time, as I got sicker and sicker, I began to build up a rather startling collection of doctors. My joke now is if there was an ist, I had it: gastroenterologist, cardiologist, rheumatologist. Like I had them all, and a really impressive collection of pills to go along with it. And I want to start by saying I am not knocking medication. I have been the recipient of very beneficial medications over the years. The challenge comes in, I now know that the response was simply to give me more doctors and more pills. And along that path, nobody talked about what was going in my mouth aside from those prescriptions. And I began to realize that what was in what I was eating was a huge contributor to what was making me sick. And as I began to clean up my diet and get healthier, I discovered like this nerdly passion for helping people understand what's in their food and doing it in a way without being scared or overwhelmed or feeling hopeless. Like I want to make it approachable for people.
Yeah, because if it's hopeless, it's not doable, right? I mean, we eat every single day. We feed our kids every single day. And if you start to feel hopeless and you start to throw up your hands, then you're going to go to the default, which is junky food that like is addictive and tastes good but is empty of nutrients, and then everybody's health is going to suffer. So we need very practical, doable steps. So when you had that health issue, did you have a diagnosis and was it like a label?
Yeah, so
You don't have to share that if you don't want
no,
to.
no, I'm perfectly comfortable sharing that. So I was diagnosed with 5 different autoimmune disorders. My primary was ulcerative colitis. So I had ulcerations in my colon that were causing all kinds of health problems, including the inability to properly get nutrients out of my food. I had to know where a bathroom was within 20 steps of me at all times. And if I didn't, there were sometimes embarrassing consequences. It was really challenging. And I think one of the things that I like to encourage people to remember is that it doesn't really matter what your diagnosis is. It doesn't even matter if you have a diagnosis. It is never too late to start changing how you nourish yourself or those you love, because frequently, most of these diagnoses happen over a period of time. So we're working our way towards it, whether we realize it or not. So when we can make that pivot and shift away from a lot of these non nutritive ingredients in our food, what we're trying to nourish our body with, the better off we all are.
Mhm, mhm. And so in your case, was it the food changes that made the difference, or was it food additives, like hidden food things that made the difference, or was it both?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I will share my journey started when my dear friend Helene Purdy gave me a book about artificial colors that rocked my world. Because at the time, my friends all used to say to me, "Oh, you're one of the healthiest eaters I know." Like I made everything. I baked all of our bread. I made jams and jellies and pickles and tomato sauce. And we belonged to the farmer's market and the CSA. And we did all that. And we had macaroni and cheese and ranch dressing in the house. Like we were definitely a combo family here. And so I realized that it was a multi pronged approach in that it was what was in what we were eating. Because I started reading about artificial colors and going through my pantry and going, that's in everything. And then I was like, and what are these other ingredients? And then I also realized that it was what I was eating, perhaps not having as much nourishing food on hand as I should. And then there were also a lot of lifestyle changes that needed to happen: self care and sleep and mindfulness, and all of these different aspects that make up for a healthy human being that we're not taught about at all in our life unless we or someone we love has been through some kind of a health crisis.
Yeah.
And really think that's a shame.
Yeah, yeah, and there is more research and there's more understanding and I think there's just more of an awakening around the interconnection between mind, body, environment And especially with autoimmune diseases, it's super interesting research around the personality types and the history and the impact of trauma and the impact of your environment and what you eat. So it's like this interface between the external environment and the internal environment, that is leading to a lot of illnesses. And so I think that's probably what you experienced before there was really an understanding of how this happens, but now we kind of understand it a little bit better. So good on you for figuring it out.
Well, I will say that for so many people, and I certainly experienced this myself, and I believe it's part of what has allowed me to bring compassion to the work that I do, because I even if your diagnosis is different than mine or your challenges are different than mine, I've been there. I've been on that path where you're just trying to find an answer because all you want is to feel better. And I will say that when you get to a point where you literally are lying on the sofa and you are physically unable to stand up and your child is leaning over you going, "Get up, I need you," and they're crying and you literally can't do anything, you're like, "There's got to be a better answer. There's got to be something else." And like I said, I found it challenging that in all of what I went through in the beginning, there was very little to no discussion about food. And yet, food is what fuels us and what nourishes us and what provides the building blocks for all aspects of our health. So I am sad that all these years later, I still get clients who tell me that their doctors go, just eat what you like, here, take this. And that's the answer.
Yeah, and it's hard for doctors too because they're not necessarily trained in nutrition. They don't necessarily have the time in a visit to coach around nutrition. So it's really foundational, and it's really not in the wheelhouse of most medical doctors, with a few exceptions. I think if people have gone and done continuing education in it and such like that. So there, I just want to differentiate that we're talking about two different things. One is the food itself can be very therapeutic and can also be an accelerant of the problem. And then there's this idea of what's in the food, um, chemicals, additives, preservatives, dyes, all of the things that have made their way in. And we're gonna leave the therapeutic food and the accelerant piece for another podcast, but here we're gonna focus on the food additives and the food labels, because I think for families it's a real issue. We are not all in the kitchen all the time dealing with farm fresh, whole organic foods, as much as we would like to be. Some people are. If you are, good on you.
And yeah, some people are, but I mean, life is very full these days. There is so much going on that it can be really challenging. I think part of the difficulty that comes into it is, as I mentioned earlier, we are not taught any of this. And I promise you, food producers, the companies that manufacture what we eat, spend tens of millions of dollars to figure out how to make us like their product, because the life cycle value of a customer, if they can brand you as a kid into growing up and then brand your kids, oh my gosh, that is worth untold millions. And so we wind up in this not knowing where to turn, not knowing what to do, just knowing that we are hungry and we're looking to eat
Yeah,
something.
yeah, and especially with kids, we're training their taste buds, right? There is a training process going on, and it's really interesting when you have teenagers. I have teenagers who were not brought up on processed foods or artificial sweeteners, and they can taste the difference. They can taste the chemically nature of you know a a tortilla wheat wrap versus one that doesn't have chemicals in it. They can taste when there's sucralose in something, and I'm proud of myself for that because I've trained them that way. And isn't that interesting that now they can notice the difference? But a lot of folks don't notice that, and then they become they have different tastes and they have different they make different choices. So really important to know this. But if there are healthy shortcuts that we can take as parents, I want them to be on the table because healthy shortcuts are awesome. So let's let's
I'd
talk about
also
that.
like to say kudos to you for giving your children that beautiful start by not having all those things in their life. For those people, such as my children, who did not start that way, it's a challenge because we are very accustomed to things should taste or smell or mouth feel or look a certain way. And learning how to shift that can be really, really difficult, especially when we look at the effort and energy that food producers put into creating hyper palatable foods. That, there's that commercial that drives me a little bit crazy about potato chips. It goes, bet you can't eat just one. And the answer is no, you can't because they made it that way. And so learning how to shift is a real commitment and a real effort, but it also takes time. And this is like a really good place for us to stop and remind everybody who's listening that this is not meant to be like a sprint to the finish. This is a long term, step by step, baby steps, little changes at a time, so that we can slowly begin to shift and create healthier changes because it's not possible to do it all at once. You're just going to have so much pushback and it's not going to be fun for anybody.
Yeah, yeah, we have to remember that kids are part of the community of our families, and we don't want to stress the boundaries of that community too far. We are the leaders for sure, and we can make decisions about what comes in the house. But they're part of the community as well. And a number of my guests who have come on this podcast have echoed the same caution that taste buds change. Thank goodness they do change. They change in all directions, and so think, but it does take time, and we have to work with our nervous system. I mean, I work with a lot of kids who have very tender nervous systems. They have very low stress tolerance, right? And we can't blow that out of the water. We have to work with the nervous system and we have to work with the taste buds. So as you're listening to what we're going to talk about in terms of, food ingredients and all of that stuff, just be cautious. I mean, I think one of my guests last season brought up the idea of, just pick one thing that you want to change. Maybe it's the type of bagel, or maybe it's the type of apple, or maybe it's the, one thing that your child eats a lot of and start to switch it out. Maybe it's the juices or what they're drinking. Start to swap it out and just go step by step, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other thing that I will add to that is to try to get your kids to buy in to make it fun for them. I will share that I was not of that mentality when I started this journey. And, I can remember, for example, having a screaming match with my youngest in the grocery store because she wanted the juice that she was used to drinking. And I was refusing to buy it because it had high fructose corn syrup. And we had a meltdown in the grocery store, which was A, really embarrassing, little humiliating, and B, not fun for anybody else who had to witness that. And she was furious because she felt denied. And what would have been a whole lot more fun is to buy maybe 3 different juices and going, "Hey, new juice, like, let's which juice do you like?" And trying to get their buy-in and asking them to form an opinion and to really make a decision about what they like or what they're willing to allow in the house, because that kind of a gentle introduction is more likely to be successful long term than a militaristic pantry takeover.
Yeah, and like they'll probably choose the high fructose corn syrup every time because it tastes delicious and it's super sweet, right? And it's what they're used to. So if you do a taste test like that, they're probably going to make the wrong choice or the choice that you wish they hadn't take.
No, 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 you choose ones that don't have that, and you say, "Hey, here's other juices. If you had to have one of these, which one would you choose?"
Yeah, sure. But I guess I wanted to point out that, we're not this is not is not a totally collaborative process because they don't know any better, right? So they might choose the non-healthy thing and they have no reason not to, right? They don't know what high fructose corn syrup is unless you teach them. And so there's an opportunity here to teach them. And I think we do kind of I don't know what the word is, but we don't give kids enough credit that sometimes when they learn about these things, they surprise us and they start to put pressure on, it's really fun when kids can start to learn about their microbiome, or they can start to learn about, their neurotransmitters, or just in really simple language, and they start to question what's in the fridge and they start to put different things in the smoothie. That's super fun. Hey parents, this episode of the Feeding Families podcast is brought to you by the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. Are you looking for practical knowledge and tips on how to start eating and living healthier? Would you like to get a taste of holistic nutrition? Food can make a huge difference to how you feel, but with the overwhelming amount of information out there, it's hard to know where to start. The Healthy Eating and Lifestyle Certificate Workshops, hosted by CSNN, is a series of fun workshops to get you excited about healthy eating and lifestyle changes for you and your family. No prior knowledge of holistic nutrition is required. Get basic foundational knowledge about digestion and gut health, healthy fats, essential vitamins and minerals, stocking your whole food pantry, and more. It's available at select CSNN branches. You can learn more at csnn.ca/holistic-family or follow the links in the show notes.
I will share, like, one of my favorite moments working with kids was a young man. I was working with his family. We were cleaning up their pantry, and he was in the Boy Scouts. And his mother called me one day and said, "My son just told his Boy Scout troop that nobody else is allowed to be the scoutmaster because he wants to make sure he knows what's in what they're eating." And he volunteered to be the chuck wagon master, or whatever they call it, for the rest of his years in that troop. And I was like, "Ooh, yay." Like, that was a huge change. Yeah.
I remember we're going to get to food labels in just a second, but I do another quick story. I remember a friend of mine telling me that her daughter um learned about Nestle and learned about, various practices and corporate, consolidation and all that stuff. She threw away every single piece of candy at Halloween that was made by Kraft or Nestle because she didn't want to have anything. She didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so kids will surprise you as to how they make choices and when they learn things, what they want to do with that information. Let's get to food labels and just talk about, if we are in a position where we want some healthy but shortcuts and we're in the grocery store, let's talk about what's on a food label. And what do you think is most important for people to understand that's going to speed things up for them?
Great question. First of all, reading the label is the most important part because food producers put a lot of time and attention into what I call front of package labeling. They're trying to use buzzwords or images or colors or shapes or whatever to try to convince you that this is the thing you want in your grocery cart. And you don't really need to turn over that label and read the ingredients because they've taken care of it for you. Like, they really want to try to convince you to do that. So that first act of flipping it over is really important.
So this is things like source of fiber or zero trans fat.
High in protein.
Yeah, these big claims that are on the front. These are the front of package labels. Mhm.
Yes, absolutely. And then when we're looking at the label, we're really looking at two parts. The top part is the nutrition facts. And that's where they tell us, how much is a serving, how many calories, sugars, fats, whatever is in there. And that's important, but it's kind of tricky because we have to keep in mind a couple of things. One, it's based on 2,000 calorie day diet, which not everybody needs. And also, a serving size is what the manufacturer has determined is the amount you should serve. A portion is what you actually serve yourself. So the math could be way off.
Yeah, and especially with kids
Yes.
because they're small people and they don't eat 2,000 calories in a day. Usually, it depends on the kid, but yeah, so that really throws things. They're not adapted for children. And back to the front of label thing before we leave that.
I personally leave it alone. You know, I will share that the most egregious example I ever saw was a package of blue corn chips that said made with organic blue corn on the front of the label. And when I flipped it over, it had only 3 ingredients, which is not bad, but one of those ingredients was canola oil. So they took that organic corn and they fried it in one of the most genetically modified oils on the face of the planet, completely rendering all the organic goodness non-existent. And yet they had that word organic in big letters on the front of the package because they knew that that was something that was going to attract a consumer.
Yeah, yeah. I think my favorite one to hate is sugar-free, right? When it says sugar-free on the front, you're like, "Awesome, sugar-free." But I almost guarantee that there is some sort of sweetener in there. You just have to figure out what it is, and it's probably an artificial sweetener like sucralose or Ace K or aspartame or something like that. And for me, that's a hard stop, hard no in my family. I do not want those things. I would rather real cane sugar than one of the artificial sweeteners. But it trips people up all the time. It trips my husband up all the time. We'll come home with the sugar-free jam. Great, thanks, awesome. That's going back.
And yeah, you know, I think one of the other things to keep in mind is a lot of those things when they say sugar-free and they're using an artificial sweetener or even a plant-based sweetener like stevia or monk fruit or something, those can be so sweet, and we're oversaturating our palate with sugar. And so we should not be looking for sugar-free things. We should be learning how to consume less sugar
Mhm,
overall.
mhm. Yeah, which is gonna take some time because sugar is very addictive and it's very tasty and it's in everything.
Right, but, you know, and that's again where just learning to read the label, and another good point to or another good place to point this out, this is where we make one change at a time. We don't wanna do everything at once. If sugar is your thing and you're like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna get my family on a lower sugar routine," that's great. If it's, "I wanna get rid of everything artificial, artificial flavors, artificial colors, artificial sweeteners," great, start there. Like, look for something that makes sense for your family, but hopefully you're taking notes so that once you've mastered whatever it is that you're doing, then you can move on to the next thing.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. Really good tip. Okay, so we've bypassed the shocker front of label notes, and then we flipped it over and we see the nutrition facts label and we see the ingredients. What are we looking for there?
Yes, the ingredient panel is my favorite part. Um, that's what I consider the most important part, actually, because that is where you see what's actually in what you're eating. Luckily for food, they do need to tell us what's in the package. And you know, you and I have discussed this before at conferences or other times that we've talked. Nobody should need a degree in biochemistry in order to know what they're putting in their mouth. So if you see things that you don't understand in that list, then it has to go back. If you see things that are not food, identified by numbers, abbreviations, with the word artificial in front of it, that has to go back. So it becomes a way to really condense your choices because you're looking for real food ingredients. And I think the other thing that I like to point out to people when they're beginning to learn to make this change is you get to a point where the longer that list, the more you know, nope, not going to happen. Because most real food things usually have 10 or less ingredients in them. If you see something where it's taking up half the label, half the side of the package, I don't even want to read that.
Yeah, usually I get frustrated because it's like don't waste my time. Like, it's gonna take me a long time. But sometimes when you look at it and you see this big long list, a lot of those are vitamins and minerals that have been added to the food. And so I don't think that they're necessarily bad, but it does tell you that the raw ingredients are probably devoid of those nutrients, so they've added them back in a synthetic form. So on a worst, better, best, scale, I don't think that's the worst to have synthetic vitamins and minerals in there, but I get frustrated with the companies for wasting my time looking at a really big long label.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing to keep in mind about that is that the more you learn to build that habit of reading the label, especially the ingredient panel, the more aware you become of all the manipulation that's happening. And it just makes it a whole lot easier to go through. Nobody's expecting you to spend 5 hours at the grocery store. Like that would not be fun, even for me. But I mean, I go sometimes just to look at what they're doing. But 5 hours at the grocery store is a long time for anybody. So you want to start one section at a time and learn how to go through that section of the grocery store in the most efficient way for you and your family. And it's not just everything that's in the center either. It can be what's on the perimeter because there's a lot of manipulation that happens there as well. So you just take one section at a time and master that, learn how to understand it, and then go from there.
Yeah, so that's often thrown around as a strategy to just like stick to the outside of the grocery store, and you're saying maybe that's not actually going to help.
Yeah, there's something called product creep that happens. So grocery stores have a profit margin of somewhere between 1 and 3%, depending on the store and the chain. So it's not a lot. So they have to figure out ways to get you to buy more. And food producers, clearly, the more you buy, the more money they make. So they want to get you to buy more also. And there is this thing called product creep where they take things that don't belong in that section of the grocery store and they put it there. They have learned that producers are all going, or sorry, consumers are all going, I'll just shop the perimeter of the grocery store. That's where it's safest. And so now, for example, in the summer, when strawberries are ripe and fragrant and beautiful, all of a sudden, mysteriously, a little cooler appears in the produce section filled with Cool Whip and little spongy things that are supposed to be cake and maybe a little caramel drizzle or something. Like they're trying to convince you to, oh, you're getting the strawberries. Surely you want these other things as well. I don't know how many people have realized that the salad dressing aisle has now crept its way in next to all the salad ingredients. It never used to be that way, but it is now because they are really trying to get you to buy more. And it also happens in the meat section. There can be rubs and sauces and other things. Like if you go around, once you learn to see it, you kind of can't unsee it, that there are different things that have migrated out to the perimeter.
Yeah. That's interesting. We really have to keep our wits about us when we're grocery shopping, which is really not a time when you want to like have to be on all the so it's again very frustrating as parents, right? Okay, so let's talk about the ingredient list again. And what are some hard no's for you based on I already mentioned like when it says sugar free and I see artificial sweeteners. For me, that's a hard no. I just don't bring it into the house. What are some of the hard no's for you?
A big hard no for me is something called carrageenan, and it's an emulsifier. It's made from a red seaweed. Unfortunately, it is highly inflammatory to the gut and it can cause bloating, diarrhea, constipation. It has been shown in studies to cause ulcerative colitis like symptoms in the gut. It has also been linked to renal bumps on the kidney. So, not a great ingredient. Unfortunately, it appears in almost every aisle of the grocery store. So it's typically found in things like alternative dairy or frozen confections or things like that, because it is an emulsifier. And so it's great for that. I have also seen it in lunch meat. I have seen it in canned things like soups and other things like that. I've even seen it in some of the formulations in the pharmacy aisle. So it's really not a great choice for your gut. So we need to watch out for that one.
So, okay, I'm just thinking of people who are listening who are saying, my gosh, like that is in everything. It's in our non dairy ice cream. It's in our almond milk. It's in our, seemingly really healthy foods. And it's only just such a little bit. It's like the last thing on the ingredient list. How much could there be in there? Is it really a problem? And you're saying potentially it could be.
Yes, and I'm so glad you said that because the question I get when I work with people is, "Why are they allowed to put that in the food?" Once they learn about it, like, "Why are they allowed to do that?" And The reason is because it falls under something, at least in America, known as generally recognized as safe. I don't know what the terminology is in other countries, but it means that up to a certain number of parts per million, it's okay. Here's the challenge. It may be the correct parts per million for the manufacturer's specified serving size for that particular product. But what if you A, choose to eat more of that particular product, or B, who's keeping track of how many times you're eating it throughout your day as you're having all these different things? And all of a sudden it adds up to be a lot. And so that's why there are a number of things, carrageenan being one of them. I'm in huge agreement with you about artificial sweeteners, and I would extend that to be artificial anything. And then another top one, which we've talked about already, is high fructose corn syrup because it's really bad for your liver. Like those are just hard no's. If it's in what you're buying, put it back on the shelf. It's not worth it because it can have such a significant impact on your body.
I want to come back to the high fructose corn syrup in a second, but I don't want to leave gut health for a minute because you're talking about, the cumulative effect of something. I mean, sucralose is another one. It's been shown to really disrupt the gut microbiome. So does sugar. So, we have to, but let's just talk about the artificial pieces and carrageenan also. And it's hard to like add up. So that would be one tip to be like, okay, we know that these things are not good for the gut. So is gut health one of your priorities right now? That would be a question to ask yourself, right? Because a lot of people are, they know about the gut brain connection, they know about gut health. Maybe they have a Crohn's or a colitis or something that is particular, or they have chronically constipated kids. If you know that gut health is a priority for you, the impact of these things is going to be more important to keep them out, right? Because you don't want to be giving them all kinds of like fancy supplements and then be giving them something that's poking holes in their gut. So that's one way you could think about it.
I would actually take it one step further. The gut is where our body breaks down what we put into it in such a way that we can then the digestive enzymes can go in, break things down further, and then we can begin to absorb nutrients. Even if we don't think we have gut health issues, anything that we're doing that's impacting that gut microbiome could be creating, openings in those tight junctions, allowing proteins to get through, causing inflammation. It could reduce the beneficial colonies that are in our gut that are supportive for us. So even if you don't think you have a problem, if you're consuming things that are negatively affecting your gut, you're not getting the most you can out of what you're eating. And the truth of the matter is, it's not just what we eat, it's what we absorb that really has the biggest impact on our nutritional status and our well being.
Yeah, yeah, and there are a number of things. It's not just what we eat either. It's the antibiotics, it's the pollution, it's the stress, it's the lack of sleep, it's the sugar, it's the all of the different things that are interfering with our gut microbiome. And again, it comes back to what I was saying at the start, where I really don't want people to panic. The gut microbiome is super important. But you know what? If your child is very healthy, they're good at school, they have good poops every day, they are, their skin is clear and they are happy and healthy and well adjusted, then the carrageenan that you're going to get in that non-dairy ice cream that you're going to have once in a while is going to cause damage, and that damage will probably be repaired in the gut. I mean, this is how I think about it with my family. It's if it's like every day, multiple times, you're having it in your almond milk and then in your ice cream and then in your meat and then in your this and then in your that. Plus you have a very stressed out kid. Plus they're having trouble at school. Plus they can't sleep. Plus they can't poop. All of these things. Well, then you know what? It's gonna cause more problems than it's not worth it. That's how I kind of balance it.
And I will share my version of the 80/20 rule is I try to get the home environment to be as clean as possible and save that 20% for outside the home exposures. If you're going out to eat, if you're going over to a friend's house, if you're going to a family gathering, those kinds of things, because you have no control over that. And so rather than worrying about it, there's a condition called orthorexia, which is where you are so overwhelmed by the need to eat so cleanly that you cannot eat anything if you do not intimately understand every aspect of it and have essentially prepared it yourself. And that's not a very healthy way to live. So we do what we can where we are. If we know we're going to be going on the road, then yes, let's pack healthy snacks and let's make sure that we have, good beverages and that kind of thing with us. But if someone invites us over, we just say, thank you, yes, and enjoy that time
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, it is a balancing act. I mean, it is a balancing act. When I have parents come to me and their kids are in crisis and they're having some really major challenges with their kiddos, I say that's a really good time to protect your space and to say no to the birthday party and to say no to the grandparents and just say like, listen, we're just doubling down for the next month or so and we're just going to clean things up and connect and focus and you actually have that power. You can say no to things. It might annoy people. It might make people angry, but you are the CEO of your family and you get to make those choices. Yeah, so I do agree with you. Okay, so we talked about carrageenan, we talked about the artificial sweeteners. Is there anything else that you feel like is a hard no for you? Oh, high fructose corn syrup. I wanted to come back to that.
High fructose corn syrup. Yeah. So high fructose corn syrup and its cousins are definitely a hard no for me. One of the things we have to remember is that the only organ in our body that can process fructose is our liver. If we consume too much, our body shunts all of those extra calories aside into adipose or fatty tissue. So we, get kids who have, poochy bellies, adults who have poochy bellies, we're gaining all this weight. But what we can't see underneath is what it's doing to our liver. And there is a condition called non alcoholic fatty liver disease that can come from excessive fructose consumption. So we want to be aware of that and avoid it. The cousins of high fructose corn syrup that I'm referring to both happen to be higher in fructose than high fructose corn syrup, which is essentially, by the way, a found product because we just grow too much corn. So they had to figure out other things to do with it. And now corn turns into something like 85 different ingredients, including a sugar. And high fructose corn syrup is 55% fructose by volume. The next highest fructose cousin is agave nectar. And there's probably some people out there right now going, like, don't take my agave. I know, and the challenge is agave nectar is low glycemic, so it's become like a darling of the sugar world because it doesn't spike blood sugar, but it is 70% fructose by volume. If you are cooking with it and putting it in your sweet tea and using it for other things, like all of a sudden you could potentially be getting way too much. And I will say that the way the indigenous ancestors used agave was very different. Now, because of the way we process it, that fructose is just opened up and highly available. So it's a problem. And then the last one is so we have 55% in high fructose corn syrup, 70% in agave nectar. The last one is 90% fructose by volume, which is just a startling amount. And it's found in something called crystalline fructose. And the name kind of pisses me off because it sounds a little benign, crystalline crystals, but it's 90%. It's in very, very simplistic terms, it's dehydrated high fructose corn syrup. So it's very concentrated. And it tends to be found in things like if you've ever been to one of those frozen yogurt bars, where you serve yourself yogurt and then go to the candy bar. It's in the yogurt. It can be found in some of the beverages that they have for kids, although some companies are starting to take it out, which is great because there is a little bit of pushback against it. But crystalline fructose is another one that is just a hard pass. No, 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 because it's too much. And the impact that it has on your liver is just not worth it.
Yeah, and to clarify, it's not having an insulin response like sugar does. So, diabetics are drawn to these higher fructose sweeteners, but it does impact the liver, and it can create high not non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So just wanted to clarify that. And for high fructose corn syrup isn't always called high fructose corn syrup.
Yes. Sometimes, yes, it's called glucose fructose syrup. is the next most common one. But yes, there are a number of different names for it.
Yeah. So I would, if I'm looking at a food label and it's something that's sweet, I would far prefer cane sugar. That would be my first choice, which is mostly sucrose. And I think what would be our next choice? Our next choice, or actually even better than that, would be fruit.
Yes, fruit would be great. And I wanna stick in, like, a little baking note for all those people who sit there and, we're talking at a different time of year, but when the holidays come, everybody wants to bake things like pecan pie, and they're like, "Gotta have corn syrup." Like, how are you gonna make without corn syrup? And the answer is there is something called cane syrup, which is just as sticky and just as sweet and just as sugary as corn syrup, but I believe it's a slightly better product, and I have successfully made a pecan pie with it. So it is a good substitute if you want that amount of sweet. If you're willing to get a little adventurous, then we look at modifying by, cooking down something like a honey or a maple syrup and using that to make a pie or find a different pie. But I'm just saying, like, we don't have to always use those products that we think we're used to. A little bit at a time, as we're shifting, we start to look for other options that can be equally delicious, but not have the same impact on the body.
So some of the take homes that I'm getting here is, we want to look for simple labels that don't have a lot of bypass the claims, go to the labels. The nutrition facts labels isn't all that helpful, especially when it comes to kids, because they're not necessarily eating the same kind of portion sizes or a 2000 calorie diet. Plus it's a good step forward. I'm glad that it's there, but it's not complete, right? It just has a few pieces on there. It's really that ingredients label that you want to learn how to master. And we've talked about a few things that, you know what, if it's on there, just put it back. And then this idea that the shorter the better, the shorter the better.
And it is okay to take it back to the grocery store. Like, I loved that earlier you said how your husband came home with something and you were like, "Yep, that's going back." And as I mentioned, I don't expect you to spend hours at the grocery store. We tend to shop on autopilot. It's helpful if we can learn to build a little bit of awareness, but I do encourage everybody, if you don't read it at the grocery store before it goes in your pantry, just flip it around and look at it. And if it's something that you realize you don't want, take it back and make a mental note. Okay, next time we go to the grocery store, this particular product, we're going to look for a better option. We're not going to buy the same thing anymore. And as a matter of fact, I have a phrase for that. I encourage people to be brand disloyal. Stick with a brand. Get what you need, not what they're telling you should buy.
Right. This is why shopping with kids is really tricky because they don't understand the difference. Yeah. And there are now some really good apps out there that you can scan product labels and it'll tell you what are a few of them just so people can look at them. They're all vary in different qualities, but what are a couple names that you can remember?
Oh, I'm actually gonna pull out my phone here and look because I do have a couple of them on here. I know one of them is Fooducate. There's Open Food Facts. There's Yuka, Yuka. And then let's see, do I have any others right off the top here? Foogal, Foogal. So those are all some good apps that tend to have a lot of information. And there are some apps also out there that are specifically geared towards people who have a particular health condition. So, for example, if you need to eat a low FODMAP diet or you have some particular health condition, you need to shop a certain way, there are now more and more apps that can be geared towards that, where you can scan it and it will tell you, nope, this is not for you.
Yep. Yeah. And I would always double check. I mean, I think these are great. They can really speed things up. And actually, if you're shopping with your kids, they can be a great way to get them involved to be like, "Well, I'm saying no to this, but let's scan it and see what it says." And I've had a few clients using that and again, the kids start to be like, "Oh, wow, this is really interesting." They like scanning it. And then things pop up and they're like, "Oh, this one's okay, mommy. This one's okay." And it brings them into the conversation, right? So, I mean, we have to create a culture of nourishment in our homes, and if we're not going to teach our kids how to eat and how to shop, who is, right? The companies that want them to eat the very addictive, expensive, not so good for you stuff, right? So we don't want that. So I like that these apps exist, and I would say, try them out. Try one and then cross check and say, like, what's it showing you that's okay, and what's it showing you that's not okay, and just do a little Google search on those things and spot check it, and see which one's going to work for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, the kitchen table is a community that I created. I've been doing this work for almost 20 years, and I have built an incredible repository of classes and ebooks and handouts and everything else. And I wanted to have it all in one place where we could gather around the kitchen table with a cup of tea and learn and support and grow together. So it's a monthly membership that gives you access to all the programs, all the materials, and then there are 2 live monthly calls with me. One is about building a preparedness pantry, so you have the foods that you need on hand in an emergency situation to support your family in a healthy way. And then the other is holistic wellness office hours, where we cover a broad range of holistic wellness topics. And it's the kitchen table. I'm happy to send you a link that you can share with your people. If anybody wants to just check me out, as Jess said, I am known as the ingredient guru, and you can find me all over socials and YouTube and the web as the ingredient guru.
Well, thank you for continuing to just bring this out to into people's conversation and into people's lexicon. It is, it's just part of what we need to learn now. It's part of our learning curve that kind of blindsides us when we start to raise a family, that wow, I got to feed these kids all the time, and there's a lot of food out there that's not really food, and oh gosh, I have choices to make and a budget to manage. And we are meant to learn this stuff in community. We are meant to come together and have conversations about it. There are very few hard and fast rules about this. It all really depends on your situation, on your priorities, on your circumstance, on on your kids, um, and your resources and what you have access to. So we have to bring this into conversation and narrow down our choices, because otherwise it's very overwhelming.
And I love how you're making this so accessible for people and really giving them a resource where they can learn more and figure this out, because all too often, especially if you have a child who has some sort of health challenges or whatever, it can be really difficult to know where to go. So thank you for everything you do.
Well, likewise. Thank you. We went a little longer than I expected, but it's really important information. So thank you for having this conversation. And everybody, you guys should follow up with Mira and learn more about her and her books and her resources. Thank you so much for coming. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And if you feel called to, share it with another family who needs to hear it. There are more tools from me at jesssherman.com/learn and jesssherman.com/membership, alongside all the great resources you'll find at EcoParent. Things are changing for kids, and the more we come together in conversation as parents, the more we can find ease and joy as we raise the next generation together. I look forward to seeing you back here next time. Until then, keep at it. You have the most important job in the world.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please consider leaving a review and subscribing to the podcast. If you think this podcast is great, our host, Jess Sherman, has condensed everything you need to know to nourish your family into a truly fantastic 7-hour video course. You can learn more at ecoparent.ca/learn. It will change the way you think about feeding your family. You might also be interested in our Kids Wellness course, taught by Dr. Leslie Solomonian. As a thank you for listening, I'd like to offer you a 15% discount on any one of our online courses or any subscription to EcoParent magazine. Just head on over to ecoparent.ca, hit the Eco Shop button in the navigation bar, and use code FEEDING15 at checkout. All caps, no spaces, that's FEEDING15. Till next time.